Hey YouTube, welcome back to another video. I want to use this video as a more casual way to talk about games. Aside from the main multiplayer games I play with my friends, I've started playing a lot more games that I want to cover, but might not have the time to do a full in-depth playthrough and review. So I want to try to talk through the Ascent and maybe some other games in the future, because the Ascent is really, really good. And let's jump into it. So if you don't know what the Ascent is, it's a new top-down shooter game that's out for free on Game Pass or $30 on Steam. There's also some light RPG elements and some good customization for your abilities, armor, and cosmetics, but I'll get into more of those when I talk about the combat, my favorite part of the game. And there's some 4-player online co-op and 2-player couch co-op. I wasn't able to test either of these because I didn't know anyone who had the game and wanted to do a full playthrough with me. The whole game takes place at a well-designed cyberpunk city called Veles. In it, you're an indent. You're basically just a slave to society, and you're tasked with doing different hitman contracts and different jobs for your bosses. Your boss changes as the story goes on, and I don't want to spoil any of that, but you'll handle a lot of different types of missions, like fighting rival gangs, sabotage, and a lot more. I think the overall aesthetic for the city is pretty impressive. Along with that, I think the scale is also probably more impressive to me. Each area of Veles feels really different. In the opening hours, you're sent to a lot of different parts of the city, and it's clear that the developers have really spent time crafting that world. The backdrops for each of the worlds is really detailed, and there's a lot of good crowd density that helps the world feel lived in. You can also read some side conversations from citizens, which can help flesh out the world and give some more context to your actions. Especially early on, you can read conversations about characters that you're actually interacting with, some of the things they do when they're not with you, and that makes it pretty compelling to kind of get some more information from them. Aside from the aesthetic of the game, I think the combat is probably one of the most compelling parts of the game. Each encounter can feel really varied, especially when you start testing out different augmentations. Your character can have 2 separate weapons, a grenade, and then 2 augmentation abilities. So basically just 2 active abilities you can use in combat. And given the sheer amount of gear you can get from missions and traders, there's a lot of variety there. Enemies, though, aren't really that varied. So there's different gangs in Veles, and each one kind of fits a specific mold. There are specific types of enemies, classes that you can fight. So some that have melee weapons, some that have guns, some that have shields that can bash you, and then different types of large mechs that can shoot missiles at you. There's some variation in there, but the main difference I saw was the types of weapons they use. So there are like ballistic weapons, energy weapons, and a lot of other ones that you can use as well. One of the other things to note on these enemies is you don't always have to fight them, which I really like. In the minimap, you can see enemies as either yellow or red. Yellow enemies will only aggro on you if you provoke them. They'll actually tell you to leave, and so you can follow that or not. Some of those yellow encounters are in the way of your missions, so sometimes you will have to fight through them, but it's nice that you kind of have the option not to engage if you don't want to, and if you can always just farm easy kills and XP on them as well. Along with those standard enemies, you can also find bounties throughout the world. These aren't really quests you accept from an NPC. They're more random encounters that you find. Your AI HUD will tell you there's an enemy around as a bounty, and then you can go find them. I definitely think this is pretty unfortunate game design wise, because I wanted a little more challenge when killing bounties. I felt like bounties were kind of more just a standard enemy with the name on them. I kind of do wish the bounties would have been a little more difficult to kill, but with a higher reward when you actually turn in the bounty. But the last thing that I kind of want to touch on with the combat is the mission design. So throughout the story, you kind of get sent everywhere. You'll have to go pretty long distances between missions. So you do get a lot of combat, which is nice. But sometimes when you get to those missions, you just have to defend a point for a few minutes, and then the game just throws enemies at you. I don't think that type of mechanic is necessarily bad. I do feel like they just bolster the difficulty with that, but just throwing more enemies at you over and over and over. And I kind of just wish those encounters were a little more varied. They happen a few times and they kind of just feel the same each time. But overall, my combat impressions are pretty good. I definitely like the variety you can have, especially if you go into an encounter and then you keep dying, and then you might adjust your augmentations a little bit or go upgrade your weapons, and then you're more equipped to fight. I definitely think that type of system is pretty good and pretty compelling for this game. So now that we've talked about the combat and the world design, I do want to talk about a few of the things that bugged me throughout the game, specifically some of the stuff in the user interface. So the map layout in the HUD is pretty unintuitive. There's a lot of verticality in the world, and that's not necessarily reflected in the map design. Sometimes it'll show you a side quest is like right next to you, but it's actually like a couple levels vertically below or above you, which can be pretty confusing. And some of the menu controls while using a controller can be pretty unintuitive. So when you're actually in your menu and looking through everything, you can either use the right button or left button on the triggers, or left and right on the analog sticks to shift between the menus. This kind of always threw me off because I'd be a couple menus deep, for example, equipping a gun, and accidentally do an accidental press on the left when I want to go back in the menu. That's kind of something that might have been a personal problem for me, but it's something that I definitely noticed was a pain. And then kind of the last thing that I noticed with the UI is it doesn't really scale well when playing a TV. So I've played mostly on my PC, but I also played on my TV downstairs, and I think the TV experience is pretty inferior, and which is unfortunate because this game is on Game Pass and a lot of people will play it on Xbox. So I think the main issue with this is that each of the individual UI components are in each corner of the screen, and it's kind of difficult to know what's going on. One of the biggest gripes with this is where the dialogue from characters shows up. So all the dialogue shows up in the top left hand of the screen, which can be difficult to read, especially when you're, say, going through a mission and you want to read all the dialogue, but you're being attacked by enemies. It's not really possible. I do kind of wish the dialogue was like kind of in the bottom of the screen, like in a normal game, but overall, I think the spread outness of the UI, especially in each of the corners, can make it kind of hard to tell what's going on, especially knowing when you need to level up, because it's just like a very small progress bar in the bottom right hand of the screen. Along with the UI, one of the things that kind of bugged me throughout the game was traversal in the game. So you can fast travel, and you can fast travel a few different ways. You can fast travel anywhere with a taxi, but that costs money. It just costs 1,000 credits. Once you get into the game, that's not really a big deal. But the other way you can fast travel is through the metro system. So you can go to specific metro hubs within Veles. I think both of those are pretty helpful in order to go back to places you visited, but a lot of the quest design in the game is going to a new part of the city, which could take you like say 15 to 20 minutes just to get to your mission objective. And I do think these two things are kind of at odds with each other because they give you all these quick fast travel spots, but it doesn't really, if you do that, it doesn't really let you experience the world and kind of explore. There's a lot of collectibles. You can find a lot of components, guns, and encounters. And I feel like these two systems are kind of at odds with each other. But overall, I do think traversal is pretty good. I just wish kind of your character could run a little faster. There's no run button. You kind of just walk at the same speed throughout the whole game. But yeah, other than that, I do wish the traversal was a little faster, and that's pretty much it. And then the last thing I kind of want to touch on with this is the overall story and character building. The overall story of the game is pretty interesting to me. You're essentially tasked with like espionage and a lot of cool missions, and you're sent around doing missions for your current boss, but I don't think through all this process, your character really develops at all. Your character is very one-dimensional. He kind of just does whatever he's told, and it doesn't help that most of the characters you meet are pretty condescending towards you. They'll like always like insult you and like put you down, and it's not really like a good game in order to see like character progression for your individual character. It's more about exploring the world, which is pretty interesting, but I wish some of the characters in the game were a little more compelling. So now that we've talked about the game as a whole, a lot of the different aspects, I do want to say if this game is worth a try for you. If you're on Game Pass, I definitely think you should try it, especially if you like top-down twin stick shooters. The world and the combat do trump a lot of the negative things I had about the game, and if you enjoy those aspects of the game, I do think it'll be satisfying for you. As far as whether or not it deserves its $30 price tag, I do think it does. I think you can get about 15 to 20 hours of gameplay in this, depending on the difficulty you're in and depending on the amount of side quests you do. There's some pretty good side quest variety here. So I definitely think side quests along with the pretty interesting main story can keep you going for the most part. And yeah, that's it for my first impressions of the Ascent. If you liked the video, feel free to drop a like and subscribe to the channel. For more gameplay and coverage, I do also stream on Twitch Monday, Wednesday, Friday, where I try to stream multiplayer games or whatever games I want to cover on this channel. So until then, have a good day and I'll see you next time. Bye.